Any black person that proves to be against the community is not protected by the codes of conduct. While we honestly believe that with time we can create culture so inviting and warm that no one will ever even think of betraying the community, we also understand that these people are going to be out there. While we don't advocate feeding these people with any direct energy, positive or negative, we also don't feel like people should feel obligated to respect someone that doesn't respect them. A black person that is an enemy to his community is an enemy to himself, and does not warrant the protection or respect of the community. To be clear, having a different opinion, no matter how odd or strange, does not make them a Sambo. I'm gonna read that again. I'm gonna read that again because make sure everybody get this. To be clear, someone having a different opinion, no matter how odd or strange, does not make them a Sambo. But somebody that is actively attempting to destroy the community is clearly a Sambo, and this rule is for them.
Just to show you what they were doing, just from 1500 to 1660 as an example, they shipped 5 million black folk out of Africa just to Central America down here to dig for gold and silver. And in 150 years, black folk with tools and sticks and stones, they dug out over 16,000 tons of silver and over 4,000 tons of gold. All that went back to Europe. Black folk at that point in time were producing almost 99% of all the sugar on earth, cotton, tobacco, anything else. They were building all the houses. They were the caulkers, builders. So what they did then, they started advertising in Europe. So anybody who wants to get wealth, they go to America. You go to America, we guarantee you. We give you free land and free labor. And you would have to be an idiot to come to America if we give you free land and free labor and not get rich. So they began, and by 1710, somebody said, well, how are we going to control all these blacks? So the state of Virginia passed a law called meritorious manumission. Meritorious manumission then says that we will control blacks by building in an internal attitude inside of them to make them see things through our eyes, to make them white in everything but skin color. And what the meritorious manumission was passed by the state of Virginia in 1710 then said we will reward any black who gets very good at this. And so if any black person saves a white person's life, protects a white person's property, invents something that a white person can make money off of, or if he squeals on in the slave revolts, he would get freedom. Okay? And so I tracked from 1710, from 1710 all the way up to 1860s. And out of over 200 some possible slave revolts, a black person squealed in every one of them.
A group's ability to compete is determined by its internal cohesiveness and self-interest. Black Americans must therefore build functional communities within which they can ethno-aggregate, then practice group economics and group politics. A functional community can be best defined as a grouping of people who come together and organize for their own self-interest rather than misdirected altruistic interest. Once built, whether based upon geographical boundaries, ethnic or racial commonalities, a community cares for the collective interest of its members. Building our own communities will allow Black Americans to become economically and politically competitive, but will also give us something we have never had, a chance to compete from the vantage point of our own physical space. That is important. From our own physical space, cultural views, resources, institutions, and history. For the first time, we will be free to organize and work in our own best interest rather than the interest of a universe of ethnic and class competitors. Historically, societies were built upon three institutions that served as pillars: the family, the church, and the community. True communities are communities of mind and physical structures within a space. Both are important, but no traditional society built on land that did not own or control has been successful or prospered. Hey, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I'm Joseph Ward, and we are continuing our reading and reviewing of Dr. Claude Anderson's powerful book, Powernomics, the National Plan to Empower Black America. We are on chapter 3, building competitive communities. And I just read the first 2 paragraphs on page 63. So you saw the first clip, we're talking about the Sambos and meritorious manumission. But it's also going into this chapter when we're talking about building competitive communities. And as Dr. Claude Anderson is talking about, for the first time, Black people in America, Black people, foundational Black American ADOS, however you want to define it, Black people in America, we're coming together. We're together. We are united under a code of conduct, and we see the world through our own eyes, eyes that were never manipulated, well, eyes that are no longer manipulated by our oppressors, eyes that are not directed by our oppressors. The vision is ours. It's internalized. Well, it's an internal vision that we created for ourselves to be able to see the future that's best for us. And then we build and work for that future and make it happen for us. But we have to first become competitive. But to become competitive, we have to become a community. And so in this, we're going to talk about the difference between neighborhoods and communities, but we're also going to talk about the need to become competitive, but how Sambos can hold us back. And remember, the Sambo is no different than the Negro mindset that I'm always talking about. The Sambo is just another earlier word for the Negro mindset. I just call it the Negro mindset because I like to say that, but the Sambo is the same thing. All right. So let's jump back in it. Page 64, the second paragraph. All right. The practice of seeking territory for communities will intensify as more and more people from around the world immigrate to America. Listen, they come to America in search of a better quality of life, not to integrate with whites or to get along with Black Americans. They are coming to this country to get ahead economically and to find wealth and fortune. They commit themselves to competing with any and all groups economically and politically on behalf of themselves, their families, and their native countries. Typically, their initial destination is close or within Black neighborhoods. They have learned from official and unofficial sources that they can find great opportunities in Black neighborhoods. Within Black neighborhoods, ethnic immigrants expect to find the least expensive housing, lax enforcement of laws and regulation, and little business competition. They also find readily accessible customers, government assistance, easy access to elected officials, and employment opportunities. Though they are aware of the crime problem in Black neighborhoods, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. They find territory and build communities, right? So we are doing ourselves a disservice by not being united, but at the same time being allies for other groups of people who are not allies for us. And we're not united. So we are, I mean, if we let's just be real, right? When we're talking about the race game being competitive, we are losing the race game. Because we're not playing as a team. We're not a team. It seems like most of us don't even desire to be a team, but we have this need to help others and be allies to others. And I'm not saying we can't help anyone. I'm not saying we can't be friends with other people. I ain't saying that. But what I am saying is if we never focus on helping ourselves, we're not good allies to anybody else anyway. Like Black America has to become something that is respected, something that is that has power. We need power. We need power. We need respect. We need resources. We need land. We need control of our own destinies. We need that. We need to be empowering ourselves. That's what we talked about in the last video. Empowering ourselves rather than trying to empower others. We can't really empower others. We can only really be a rooting voice, because I mean, we can continue to give our resources to others and empower others, because really that's what empowerment is making sure people have resources and knowing what to do with the resources. That's what empowerment is. So, in effect, we are helping others empower themselves because we're giving up our resources, but we're not doing that for ourselves. We're motivating ourselves and empowering other people. So we have to refocus ourselves. We have to see the bigger picture for ourselves. Black America has to build something for Black America. Before we help anybody else, we have to help ourselves, just like on the airplane. If something goes wrong and that mask come down, you got to put your mask on first. We've yet to put our mask on. Black America is on the airplane helping everybody else put that mask on. And we're on life support because we are literally struggling to put everybody else's mask on. And we haven't put our own mask on. And we wonder why everybody else is getting ahead of us. Work together. Work together. Come on. As ethics fill in business voids, as ethnics fill in business voids in Black neighborhoods with a modicum of success, they begin to practice ethno-aggregation. They bring in and aggregate their families and others from their native lands. They then develop more businesses in Black neighborhoods. As they capture territory, they establish powerful economies and political organizations using their ethnic culture, language, and religion as their common ground. We got to compete. You got to play as a team. So basically what he's talking about is other groups of people are coming into America, setting up in our neighborhoods, building themselves up, and then passing us. These other groups are passing us. Yes, they are. And sooner or later, we're going to be a class of people that can't get the same access to resources for the most part of us. Though those of us who take care of business, those of us who have the opportunities and be able to take care of business with that, and you're going to have some Black people who are good, and you're going to have way more Black people who are not good. It's going to get worse for the whole of Black America if we don't get our stuff together. We've done videos on it. 2050 is coming real soon. So now we're getting into why neighborhoods are not enough, right? Because we're talking, listen to the language now. We in the beginning, we're talking about why we need communities. But now we're going to get into neighborhoods because we live in neighborhoods and neighborhoods are not enough, right? Neighborhoods are problematic for any group seeking empowerment. Unfortunately, most Black Americans live in neighborhoods, not communities. A community signifies commitment and the potential for power. Neighborhood does not. Webster's New Word Dictionary defines neighborhood as a vicinity or physical place where there are people living near one another. The concept of a neighborhood implies an area that is residential in nature with lesser wealth, power, and status than a community. The majority of Black Americans live in impoverished Black neighborhoods and spend approximately 95% of their annual disposable income with people who live outside of the neighborhood. They spend only 5% of their disposable income in Black neighborhoods. They spend 3% with non-Black owned businesses that are located in Black neighborhoods, but whose owners live outside of Black neighborhoods. Thus, only 2% of Black America's disposable income is spent in Black owned businesses in Black neighborhoods. It is impossible for any large population or neighborhood to be self-sufficient on only 2% of its income. By spending its disposable income in other groups, its businesses and communities, Black America impoverishes itself and impedes the growth of functional communities. That is not what competent winning teams do. You don't shoot yourself in the foot. But we're going to, as we get further into this, we're going to get more explanation of why we think the way we do. That's the reason for the Sambo clip. That's the reason for the Sambo clip in the beginning. So let's start to put the pieces together. Because the Sambo is the person who is destructive in nature and works against the best, works against the community. The best interest of the community is not the best interest of the Sambo. The Sambo is a selfish person who works only in its own self-interest. So, Sambo mindsets. So, and here we go. One benefit of Jim Crow segregation was that it forced blacks to build what could approximately be called quasi-communities. Unlike neighborhoods where people simply live in the same area, during Jim Crow segregation, Black Americans were unified with a code of conduct. They lived together because they had the same business interests and needs, but equality as important. So they trusted and developed on each other. Edit. What? All right, so now we're getting into when Dr. Anderson is describing what he calls quasi communities. And this is before segregation, before integration. So before integration, Dr. Anderson calls these quasi communities. And these quasi communities are the communities where Black people lived in before integration and Black people worked together. We had our own businesses, our own schools, our own churches, bus lines, all types of things Black people owned. Black people were more self-sufficient. Black people were actual, well, what he called quasi communities. Of course, they didn't have all the power and resources that they needed, but they had resources, and they had the resources that they needed for the time. They had some power. Black people had some power within our own communities that we could use to aggregate up if we needed to. That's what ethno-aggregation comes in, to verticalize your businesses and be able to expand what you have, right? So before integration, we had quasi-communities. After integration, we have neighborhoods. Before integration, we thought as a group. After integration, we think as individuals. This has to be planned. This has to be planned. Remember, we talk about racism affecting all 9 areas of human activity. So there has to be some planning in this, right? You create the Sambo. When you create the Sambo, and if the programming is correct, the Sambo will automatically do what it needs to do to destroy itself in this community, right? We're going to get more into that, though. Black Americans need to be accepted by white society was greater than their need to be accepted by Black society. Black people needed to be a part of white America. Black people needed their resources, so they thought. Now we see, looking back, that that was a bad idea of Black people having to have what white people had, having to live where white people live. No matter how destructive it is to your own community, no matter the danger you can put yourself and your family in moving into these white communities, Black people had to be in white communities. They had to be in the vicinity of white people. They had to have white-owned products. Like, you remember the story about that Dr. Anderson told about the ice. The gentleman went to the Black store, examined the ice, put it back, went to the white store and brought the ice from the white store because the ice was better at the white store. Go figure, right? But that's that Negro mindset. That's that Sambo. Destructive behaviors. So in developing that true sense of community, a sense of community is the collective thinking, seeing, and behaving as a we, not as a me. Team first, team first, team first, group first, group first, group first, group first, team first, group first. Like, he keeps using examples of other groups of people who come to America and are able to build themselves up, their communities, their race, their people, and have what they need to have for themselves and be able to insulate themselves with their own culture. Don't even have to change their language. Like, I just got back in town. I'm in Miami. I'm in the airport in Miami, and in certain places in Miami down there, people don't even have to learn English. They can just learn. They speak Spanish because the whole communities are insulated. Like, we are And a lot of this is being built in Black communities, on the edge of Black communities. We're literally seeing people come in with the blueprint for victory. Matter of fact, we have our own blueprint for victory. We have our own blueprint. We just abandoned it. We just abandoned. That's why we keep talking about us before integration. That was our blueprint. We just abandoned it. So now we're talking about social engineering, the creation of the Sambo, the creation of the Negro, right? How to create a Sambo. The majority of society, through its primary instructions, has used rudimentary sociological and physiological principles to control Blacks and deprive them of their sense of peoplehood. In such a state, Black people could easily be misled into inappropriate behavior, identifying with the oppressor groups and hating their own groups. And so within this, he's going to compare Black people being conditioned through slavery and oppression, the 400 years of our conditioning, to the conditioning of POWs in the Korean War. And that's going to be interesting. So, because we're talking about real life programming, So when I talk about that Negro mindset being created, it's not figurative, it's literal. It's a literal thing that happened that makes us think and behave the way we do. So research suggests that aberrant group behavior among Black people began in 1710 and were formalized into law when the Virginia colonial government introduced meritorious manumission, a public policy that was used to condition and instill internal controls into the psyche of enslaved Blacks, the Sambo. The practice rewarded Blacks who saw slavery through the eyes of the white society, were willing to work against their own group's interests and inform on members of their race who were planning to escape or free other Blacks. So meritorious manumission, and how he's putting the meritorious manumission is basically the precursor to Willie Lynchism, right? So meritorious manumission, Willie Lynchism, all of that, the same thing. So said Willie Lynchism, according to the popular belief, Willie Lynch came to Jamestown, Virginia in 1712, offering a mind-controlling ideology to destroy Black people's sense of community, right? So meritorious manumission, Willie Lynchism. Whatever it is, we know before the Willie Lynch letter, there was conditioning in place that showed Black people being Sambos, showing Black people doing whatever to get the favor of the white slave masters. But the Willie Lynchism, whether it's real or not, the effects of the conditioning are real. And the effects of the conditioning has us behaving the way that we're behaving today, hundreds of years later. 1710 to 2023. And our behavior has gotten worse. The brainwashing hasn't stopped. It has continued, has transformed. There's many different ways that they're using it now, right? So meritorious manumission versus brainwashing. That's what we're getting into. So he says because remember I talked about him comparing the Korean War, prisoners of war from the Korean War from 1950 to 1954 to meritorious manumission from 1710 to 1860, right? So he says communist brainwashing and meritorious manumission were designed to drive people apart from one another. The larger purpose of the social conditioning systems was to destroy the ability of the subjects to form natural groups and communities, develop normal relationships, support, protect, and communicate with members of their own group, right? So I'm going to read this table that is comparing what happened to Black people during meritorious manumission between 1710 and 1860 to the white POWs of the Korean War between 1950 and 1954. So the subject for meritorious manumission were 15 million African slaves. The subject for the POW brainwashing were 7,000 white American soldiers. So the goal is to control a large group of captured slaves and make them hardworking, fearful, dependent, docile, submissive, and loyal labor tools to build wealth for their captures. The goal for the POWs is to control a large group of captured POWs using minimum resources, make them non-combative, dependent, and compliant to be used as propaganda tools. Program: a system of dehumanizing and psychological conditioning using elementary principles of physical, emotional, and intellectual deprivation conducted by slave masters with the equivalent of 3rd to 4th grade education. The program, a system of re-education and indoctrination using fundamental principles of psychology in a perverted way conducted by communists with master's degrees in social sciences. And one of the stark differences between what happened to the POWs and the slaves was the physical abuse and the physical labor that was put upon the slaves as well. So the procedure is transported into hostile lands, made a minority and totally dependent, totally deprived of family, hope, and basic necessities, rewarded for identifying with slave master. The procedure for the POWs is transported into North Korea, isolated from support systems, subjected to various forms of deprivation, and with rewards and punishment divided by military rank. Reaction of enslaved blacks: internalized white values and fear of oppressors, eroded group self-interest, and abandoned code of conduct, displayed self-hate, exhibited difficulty trusting and cooperating with other blacks. Reaction of prisoners: acquiesced and colluded with captors, compromised on principles, became individualistic, selfish, and withdrawn, abandoned code of conduct, unable to organize and trust, built mental prisons within their own minds. The success rate for the enslavement was, after 300 years, 36 million descendants of slaves have the shortest life expectancy, low self-esteem, remain divided and non-competitive. They remain fearful and continue to seek white approval and rewards that come with being Sambos and sellouts. The success rate for the POWs was only 2,000 of the original 7,000 American POWs survived. Most POW camps had no guards or fences, yet no one American POW escaped in an organized attempt, became turncoats against their own country. So it's just an example to show you how real the conditioning is and how real the conditioning was to make us behave the way we still behave today. We sell out on each other for a reason. We kill each other for a reason. Racism is at the root of all of this. If you make us Sambos, we will not be a threat to white supremacy. Remember, all of this goes back to what Dr. Wilson was talking about, a fear of black people rising up and trying to take our place back. I feel black people becoming powerful. I feel black people becoming a community. I feel black people becoming united. I feel black people having a code of conduct and acting like we got some sense. I feel black people being the best versions of ourselves as a collective, as a whole. Yes, we know in reality, we're going to have critical mass. But if we ever get the majority of black people to get right, hey, some magic will happen, right? But that's the purpose of the brainwashing. The purpose of the brainwashing is to keep us divided, to keep us individualized, to keep us in this position to where we're not going to compete as a group. We'll only look out for ourselves. Simply put, brainwashing was an intensive program of dehumanization, physical degradation, re-education, and indoctrination. The North Korean communists, much like Willie Lynch, were not simply interested in controlling the POWs while they were in prison camps. They wanted to create humans who would permanently see the world through the eyes of a captor, even after they were free and integrated back into everyday American society. Both systems were enormously successful. Look at how we behave. I'm keep saying it. Look at how we behave. Out of 252 known slave revolts, a black informed nearly every time. Somebody told on the black people every time, nearly every time. Ironically, on the eve of the Civil War, over 6,000 blacks were slaveholders. Many fought with the Confederacy to maintain slavery. Some even elected to stay within the white slave masters after the Civil War was over. The analysis of brainwashing provides insight into why blacks avoid blackness and lack accountability to members of our own team. So it doesn't surprise me when, sometimes you're talking about racism and somebody will say that, well, black people own slave. I'm not surprised that black people own slave. Nobody should be surprised that black people own slave. We were brainwashed. Our right minds, we are all out of our right minds. We are all out of our right minds. That's where we are. That's where we are. We're all out of our right minds. Look here, I had to write that down. So the thing is to reclaiming our minds, reclaiming who we are, rebuilding a competitive black person, a respectable black person, reconditioning our minds, re-educating ourselves, reprogramming ourselves, paradigm shifts. We've been talking about paradigm shifts for a while. We have to recondition our minds so we can once again see the world through our own eyes, have our own vision for ourselves. So throughout the century, social engineering, especially integration, has led blacks to destroy their own group solidarity. Social integration reinforced the practice and destroyed black communities and their sense of community. Interestingly, blacks are viewing social integration in America as a failure. It is a form of tokenism. It has given black Americans limited access to resources and institutions within mainstream society. It gave with one hand and took back with the other. Blacks now own and control less than they did in 1954 before the integration process began. Blacks give up their own businesses, educational institutions, political leadership, cultural and quasi-communities. By comparison, approximately 90% of all the Asians, Arabs, and Hispanics in America immigrated within the last 30 years, following the end of the Black Civil Rights Movement, and have economically surpassed blacks. Each group owns and controls more income, wealth, and businesses than 99% of Black Americans who have been in America for centuries. The Civil Rights Movement and social integration opened the nation's doors of wealth and power to everyone except the blacks because we closed the doors on ourselves. So let's get into what a functional community is, the elements of a functional community, right? Let's get into that because, all right, we've started off with a little more diagnosis and stuff. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of things that we need to do to fix this. So functional communities, right? The first thing we need to do is to convert residential neighborhoods into functional communities that contain three elements to operate those systems, three key elements to operate functional communities. The first thing that we should do is have an independent economy that is wholly owned by residents of the community and provides consumer products, services, businesses, and employment opportunities. The second thing we need to do is have an active code of conduct and group accountability. I will put the link to the code of conduct that me, PC, and Pat created. I'll put that link to that in the description so you can look at that. Once again, we don't have a universal code of conduct, but we do have a code of conduct that we created that we can follow for now until we can create some kind of united independent code for ourselves. The third, they should have a form of governance that collectively speaks for the residents and is capable of applying political pressure to outside groups, right? So functional communities. First thing first is we need an independent economy. Then we need a code of conduct. Then we need governance, need to control us. We need to control all of that. We need to be to a point to where we're not looking at other groups to save us, to work for us, because we are totally dependent upon white people, and we need to stop that. We need to grow up. So let's go further into what an independent economy is. So because we know what an independent economy is. Let's put more light on it though. If blacks had become production oriented, right, rather than consumption oriented, right? Because we're talking about creating independent and maintaining independent economies. So becoming production oriented rather than consumption oriented. There's little likelihood that today they would have a hidden national unemployment rate of 34% and live in neighborhoods rather than communities. Today, black neighborhoods are totally dependent upon whites and other competing groups to supply products, services, and employment needs of black neighborhoods, right? So without an independent economy, basically, you are totally dependent on your captors. So a code of conduct. A code of conduct is a standard of behavior that outlines what is right and wrong within the outside of the community. It serves as a competitive tool that promotes group unity and accountability by suggesting either rewards or punishments for its members based upon how the acts help or hurt the members of the group. The burden for establishing and enforcing a code of conduct typically falls upon the shoulders of the community's basic institutions, the church, the family, and the school. A code of conduct must effectively discourage Sambo behavior that was once known as Uncle Tomism. So remember, the Uncle Tom story. Well, the use of the term Uncle Tom is not necessarily correct, right? Uncle Tom is mistaken for the Sambo. So in the story of Uncle Tom was the black person who actually stood up for and fought for black people. Sambo was the one that was turning his back on black people and telling on black people and being destructive toward black people. So, when we call people Uncle Toms, we're actually doing that wrong. You're supposed to call people Sambos and not Uncle Toms, because Uncle Tom helped black people. Sambo worked to hurt black people. So, but a code of conduct, it eliminates Sambo behavior. This kind of behavior is extremely detrimental to the community building. It is nearly impossible to eliminate because dominant societies rushes to reward it. Samboism is a mean of social control that extends all the way back to slavery. The majority of society has always needed a few blacks who would sell out their race for their own personal gains. The practice of Samboism has continued for more than a century after slavery ended because there is still not a prescribed code of conduct that either forbids it or imposes consequences to those who engage in it as a means of selling out their race. There was no code until now. ThePACTS.org. 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 Look at our code of conduct. There's something in there. The clip I just showed about the Sambo. No Sambo rule. All right. So social and political governance. All right. A functional black community should have a structure of social and political governance that regulates community institutions and represents the collective interest of the community. All across America, black neighborhoods are administered and governed by whites, even in cities where black elected officials are already in place. Whites set the rules. Blacks are expected to obey. This pattern of domination was achieved with the full knowledge and support of both white and black societies. Once blacks get into a stronger position, they should not allow whites or any other group to represent them in competitive institutions. To do so constitutes a conflict of interest. However, for the moment, whites control all the institutions within black neighborhoods. They drive the benefits of authority, income, job, and business opportunities from governing in both white and black communities. Moreover, they determine what services black people receive and the products or opportunities that exist within black neighborhoods. It is now imperative that blacks put themselves in positions socially and politically to represent and be responsible for their own community. This will not be easy, but damn it, that's what we must do. We must do it. So moving into nationalism and pluralism, right? Talking about the the ideology and the idea of Black nationalism, but it's not necessarily a reality because you have to work as a group to actually practice Black nationalism. Now, there are people who are Black nationalists, but Black people do not practice Black nationalism. Since nationalism and pluralism allow millions of ethnic immigrants to compete as a group, they have the potential to do the same for Blacks. Devotion to one's own culture group or nation is called nationalism. Nationalism helps groups build communities, mobilize for power, and control resources. It allows cultural groups to function as nations within nations. Black Americans are a nation within a nation, but have never behaved in a manner consistent with this reality. In our pluralistic society, many groups are nationalistic. They form their nation of peoplehood based on common understanding characteristics from skin color to language. Nationalism is based upon a sense of community and can make it easier for Blacks to build a cohesive group within the nation. I'm just saying. I don't have to keep beating that dead horse, but that's what we need to practice. We need to practice that. So, and Dr. Anderson is getting into, in order for ethno-aggregation and vertical integration to happen, we have to have that codification. We have to be codified, but we have to be united. And we have to become a community so we can pool our resources together and use our resources to improve our communities, right? It goes into talk about how other groups of people come into our communities and aggregate their businesses, aggregate their communities, aggregate their businesses. Then they move out of our communities and they have what they need for themselves. So once again, the blueprint was already set. We set the blueprint for ourselves before integration. We had what we needed for ourselves. We controlled our own communities. We controlled ourselves. We were self-sufficient. We had no choice but to be self-sufficient, and we were self-sufficient. When a choice was given, and which was a brilliant choice by white people, because think about it. If Black people would have never integrated into white America, we would be more of a competitive force because we would be more self-sufficient. And no telling how much wealth Black America would have been able to build over the years, barring we were able to protect ourselves from literal destruction from white Americans. But say we built ourselves up to be able to protect ourselves. Ain't no telling what we would have been able to build for ourselves, maintaining our communities or rebuilding communities that were destroyed and being able to move forward as communities, as a group. Then as a race, moving as a race. And no telling what we could have had. But that was the plan. That was part of the overall plan, to break us up, to get us to move as individuals. Because once we move as individuals, we're one less group of people that white folk got to worry about. It's on autopilot. The Negro must exist so white supremacy will not be challenged. So now, but when we get into talking about building our own, so bam, we build our own, we ethno-aggregate, we vertically integrate. We are functioning as a quasi-community again. So now we have to set boundaries. And we're setting boundaries because if we build it, we must protect it, because history showed us that if we build it, white people will try to destroy it because we are competition to them. That is why everything that Black people built was destroyed, because it was competition to white success. So Black Americans can build communities, but to keep them and have them achieve their objectives, they ought to be marked and closed. Marking is one of the first practices that we should institute as a part of our code of conduct once our communities are up and doing business. We must mark our communities the way other groups do. By marking our communities, we send the message that these communities belong to us. Today, there are no positive signs that identify Black neighborhoods and say this is ours. When Black Americans begin to mark territory, it does not mean that others are not unwelcome any more than when Arabs, Chinese, and Hispanic mark their communities. Do the pagodas in Chinatown mean that non-Chinese cannot enter there? No. To the contrary, mark boundaries invite all to come, but primarily as customers and visitors. And basically he's saying these things should represent us. The markings that we put on our businesses and our sides of town should represent us and our culture and the way we live and our mindset and everything. Because when you go into Chinatown, you know you're in Chinatown. When you go into Little Haiti, you know you're in Little Haiti. When you go in Little Havana, you know you're in Little Havana. When you go in white neighborhoods, you know you're in white neighborhoods. When you go in the ghetto, it's marked by destruction, but not by actual cultural things that show that we are progressive. And things that show that we own this. So we have to first own our communities and then mark them and say, hey, I mean, y'all can come spend this money. Y'all come spend money with us. But remember, you're a guest in our house. So take your shoes off and respect my house. So once we put together the elements for a functional community, an independent economy, a code of conduct, and a form of government, our team now has a foundation from which to compete politically and economically, right? So talking about group accountability, group cooperation, group trust, all those are elements of a functional economy. So in conclusion, he's saying the success of our national empowerment plan to a great degree depends upon our ability to build, mark, and close physical communities and develop mindsets that connect us to one another. Integration destroys communities. It does not build them. Community building is organized around people with common goals who appreciate and recognize each member's contribution to the overall group goals. A competitive community is one that operates upon competitive advantages. Within our national network, we must build competitive communities that contain social, political, economic, religious, educational, and geographic assets that act as foundations of power. Communities are also repositories for Black assets. And in order for us to pass down something to our people, we have to have something and then build insulation around it so we can pass it down. The primary obligation of a community is to equip its members to live and compete successfully in the domestic and global society of today and tomorrow. Those community members who are able to make this work will become the new Black leaders because they will know how to apply the Powernomics vision in order to achieve Black empowerment. We will have our own vision. True leaders should be leading us to tangible results. True leaders should be leading us to tangible outcomes. You hear what he's saying? Dr. Anderson is saying it as well. I've been saying it, but Dr. Anderson is saying it as well. True leaders, real leaders, not spokespersons, lead us to real, tangible outcomes. The time for talking is over. The time for talking is over. Our situation is too bad now to just be satisfied with talking. Building has to happen. If you're not getting what the Black people in the city and the neighborhoods that you live in and working to build communities, you tripping. Get out and build. Get out and work with people. Do something, whatever your skill set is, whatever your talent is, use that to help to build your communities. If you're not doing that, remember, there's no real blueprint to this. There's no real blueprint. But what we do know is, well, there's no real blueprint to coming out of this oppression like this. We do have a blueprint of creating self-sufficient communities. We do have those blueprints. There are plenty of examples of Black people creating our own communities, our own cities and things in the past. We just have to dust off those blueprints and use them. But there is no blueprint on getting out of oppression. We have no blueprint for that. But we do have blueprints to be self-sufficient. And we can use those. We can use those blueprints for self-sufficiency, but Dr. Anderson is laying out the steps right here. But first, we got to change our minds. That's going to be the hardest part. The hardest part is to rearrange our minds and have these paradigm shifts to no longer think like Sambos. Sambos have to go. Sambo can't live no more. Sambo mindset is holding us back. All right. So happy Monday. Remember, let's build, 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 let's build. So we can get to where we need to go and create what we need to create for ourselves. At this point, we're the only ones that are holding ourselves back. Let's do it. Happy Monday. Remember to catch the next video coming up. Like this video, comment, subscribe, share it. Let's get this message out. I believe YouTube is shadow banning me, so please hit that notification bell. And make sure you hit the notification bell so you can see the videos and check back to the page. I believe YouTube is shadow banning me, but let's fight through it. I'm not going to start giving this information. So let's work together. All right. Love y'all.